All right, so this is my senior seminar on the death penalty and whether or not it should be used today in society. So, as many of you know, I sent out a Google form about a month and a half ago asking what y'all think if the death penalty should be used or not. I looked at the responses and I noticed a recurring theme in a few of them, and it was this idea of people saying, "Hey, well, I think if someone commits this atrocity of a crime, they deserve to have this punishment." Which I looked at and I read and I realized that's not what I asked. I asked if it should be used, not if they deserve it. So I very quickly realized that the question we should be asking in regards to the death penalty isn't whether or not it's deserved, but rather if we as human beings are capable of justly putting someone to death for their crimes. Now, what I mean by whether or not it's deserved and how that doesn't matter, I'm not talking about if they're guilty or not. I'm not talking about, oh, well, we don't know for sure. I'm talking about the Ted Bundys, the people who we know have done these crimes. It's not, oh, is Ted Bundy guilty or not? Does he deserve the death penalty? Because he does. That is an irrefutable fact. The question is can we find it in our hearts to look at him and justly put him to death? Well, what does justly putting someone to death look like? Well, we have to look at the ideas of justice and vengeance. So vengeance is oftentimes associated with a personal or emotionally fueled retribution. So an example of vengeance, let's say Miss Lucas were to go and kill my mom in the back of the classroom. All right? And I decided to take it upon myself to enact retribution. And I decide I'm going to go out of my way and I am going to kill Miss Lucas. Now, is this just? Is this just?
No.
I'm hearing a lot of no's. Why is it not just? Okay? Apart from Claire here. Claire thinks it's okay to go out and kill people. But whatever. So why is this wrong? Well, for three reasons. One, first of all, if I'm going after Miss Lucas, odds are it's because I hate her for what she's done. I'm against her very being, and I do not want what's best for her. I'm making it personal by looking at the government and saying, no, this isn't your spot anymore. This is my place. This is my place to enact this punishment. And by doing so, I'm going against the authority that God has put into place over me. So this vengeance that happens is completely unjust, completely wrong, as all of us but Claire would agree. So then we look at justice and what justice is. Well, justice in the Hebrew is this word called mishpat, which in the Bible most of the time refers to this restorative type of justice, this idea of helping the immigrant, the orphan, the widow, the people who just aren't treated as image bearers of Christ. Now, sometimes, yes, it does talk about this retribution type of justice, but most of the time it is talking about restorative justice. So if we look at our modern court system, all right, let's say this time Miss Lucas just punched my mom, all right, and just assaulted her out of nowhere, all right? So in this scenario, they go to court, and the court looks at Miss Lucas and they go, you have done this crime, we're going to give you this punishment. And it's settled. Where is the restorative aspect of that? Where is the mishpat? Where is the restorative justice? Other than the fact that the perpetrator is now locked behind bars, there's nothing restoring. There is no restoring being done. It's only retribution. And this is where our court system oftentimes falls short, is we're so bent on getting the retribution that we don't take a second to look at the restoration. So with these two definitions in mind, we have to ask, what does the Bible seem to say? So we're going to start with Genesis 9:6, which is the staple verse of the death penalty. Anytime you have a conversation with someone about the death penalty, this gets brought up. It says, whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for God made man in his own image. At first glance, this looks very straightforward. Someone kills someone, they are to be killed. But we also see throughout the Bible people like David, Solomon, Moses, Paul, who shed the blood of man and yet were not killed. So I don't think that we can say that this is a one-to-one of if someone kills someone, they have to be killed. Mind you, this also happens, this is given to Noah, this law is given to Noah right after the flood. People were doing what was right in their own eyes. God sees this, floods the earth, saves Noah, gives him a set of laws. In these laws, he is setting up civil government. He is setting up a new authority over people to ensure that they do not do what they did right before the flood. And so people have read this verse, and yes, the death penalty is in there, but people see this also as God setting up civil government. So I don't think that we can say that this is just a one-for-one, you killed someone, you're dead. If we go to Matthew 1:18-19, I think this verse honestly backs it up. It's right before Jesus is born, and Mary comes to Joseph, and she's pregnant. What on earth does this have to do with the death penalty? Well, per Joseph's knowledge, he does not know that Mary is pregnant with the Messiah. All he knows is that his betrothed to-be wife has come to him, and she's pregnant. Per Levitical law, she is to be stoned. Not, it's recommended he stone her, she is to be stoned. Very similar to Genesis 9:6, if not the same wording. She commits a crime, she is to be stoned. This person killed someone, they are to be killed. It's the same line of thinking, and yet Joseph decides, I'm not going to stone her. I'm going to divorce her. And he is called a just man for doing so. So how on earth can Joseph be considered a just man if he's not upholding the law of God? Unless, of course, this isn't a one-to-one, and this is not commanding people to kill someone for the sake of someone murdered or spilled blood. Joseph here is called a just man because if we go back to what I said about what justice is, he perfectly encapsulates what it is. He looks at this woman who he believes has cheated on him, and he says, I'm not going to stone you. I'm going to divorce you. There is a retribution. The fact that Mary is now going to be a divorced woman in this society is retribution enough. So what's the restorative aspect? What's the mishpat? What is the restoration? The restoration is the fact that he does it quietly as to not put her to shame. While, yes, he is giving retribution, he's also looking at her and trying to do what's best in her own interest and still trying to protect her from what the rest of the world is going to try and do to her. And that is why Joseph is called a just man. It's because he perfectly encapsulates what true justice is, both retribution and punishment for what has been done, but also restoration to the people who will be marginalized, which ultimately would be Mary if she were to be divorced. So, is there ever a moment in the Bible where there seems that the death penalty is used correctly? If you look at 1 Kings 1 and 2, it's the story of right before David dies. There's his two sons, Adonijah and Solomon. Adonijah is the older brother, so per social norms, he should inherit the throne. Yet, David says, I want Solomon to inherit the throne. By David saying Solomon will inherit the throne, this is both a decree by the king, their fathers, and God himself. Solomon is to rule Israel. Adonijah decides, no. So he goes and grabs his followers, he starts proclaiming himself as king, and starts trying to get a following. David ultimately hears about this, and he decides to set the record straight and says, no, Solomon is the king. So Solomon is declared king, and Adonijah immediately runs to the altar and grabs the horns of the altar. For those of you who do not know, this is his way of gaining sanctuary so he cannot be killed for his actions. Solomon says, I will show you mercy and I will not kill you, so long as you show loyalty to me. Now, the reason Adonijah should have been killed here is because, as my earlier statement, he defied not only the king of Israel, who was appointed by God, but his own father, who, for those of you who don't know, disobeying your parents and, not necessarily disobeying, but being disrespectful and blaspheming your parents was sometimes death penalty could be used there in Old Testament times. So his father, he has disobeyed. The king of Israel, he has disobeyed. And he has also disobeyed the will of God overall through David. So he deserves the death penalty. Yet here's Solomon saying, I'm not going to kill you. I'm going to show you mercy as long as you're loyal to me. So they leave. Solomon starts ruling, and Adonijah immediately goes to Bathsheba. The now late, well, she's alive, but David has died, and Bathsheba is now a widow. And he goes to Bathsheba, his half-mother, or stepmother, I guess, and says, essentially, I feel as if the throne has been stolen from me. I have one simple request. I ask for you to advocate for me and ask Solomon to give me the hand of this girl named Abishag. So Bathsheba goes to Solomon, who's now king, and says, hey, you should give your half-brother Abishag's hand in marriage. Solomon immediately realizes what's happening and freaks out. The reasoning for this is because Abishag was David's last slave before he died. Due to their relations, if someone were to take her hand in marriage, they would have the right to the throne and be able to get kingship. Solomon realizes this isn't some little request because Adonijah is tired of being lonely. This is a request to essentially gain the throne from Solomon yet again. So what does Solomon do? He kills him right there. He goes, he tells his right-hand man, go kill him. So how is this just? How does this encapsulate Mishpat? Well, to start, Adonijah had originally been guilty of something that should be death, and yet he was shown mercy. He is someone who tried to overthrow the king, was told no, and then was given mercy, and he was brought up. He was going to be marginalized for the fact that he tried to overthrow both God's commandment, the king's commandment, and his own father. So the fact that he was shown mercy in the first place was already restorative enough. He takes advantage of this, and he's ultimately killed and shown retribution. So, I think there is times in the Bible where the Bible seems to be pointing towards the death penalty being something that we can do. The Bible also points to us being just and civil people. And if I'm being honest, I don't see anyone acting like Solomon did here. I don't see us getting a court of people together who are all just and are all encapsulating this true justice. Okay, because Solomon wasn't doing this out of bloodlust. He didn't want to kill his brother. He didn't do it because he hated his brother. He did it for the protection of Israel, for the protection of his throne, and for the protection of God's commandments. So if we start looking into modern times and start going away from the Bible a little bit, we have core reasons that people are oftentimes in favor of the death penalty. Now, I'm going to start with number 2 and kind of work my way around. So sorry to anyone who that might bother, but you can deal with it. So the first argument that people will often use is the cost of life without parole in prison versus the death penalty. The idea that if we lock somebody up for their whole life, it's going to cost significantly more than it will if we were to just kill them. Only if this were true. The median cost to put someone to death from pre-court trial up until execution is $1.2 million. The price it takes from pre-court till death in prison with life without parole is on average $700,000, which means there's an average difference of $500,000 per person. So this is not true at all. Yet people still try to use it as a means to put someone to death, which I don't know why you would put money on someone's life to begin with, but here we are. So then there's the argument of closure. If someone you loved were to be killed, you would find closure in the fact that the perpetrators to be killed as well. So they did a study on this. They asked people, they said, they got people whose perpetrators had been killed or who their loved ones' perpetrators had been killed. And they said, did you find closure in the execution? A whopping 2.5% said yes. Which, if any of y'all take statistics, you know that that's an unusual statistic. You know that that is not to be even thought of. 20.1% said that it did not help them find closure at all. Their reasoning? Because it didn't help bring back the victim. Remember how I said that justice has retribution and it has restoration? What was it that these people were missing? It was the restoration. It didn't fix anything. It just made them feel it made them feel more empty and made them have this feeling of longing for something that could never come back. So then we have the argument of deterrence. This idea of, well, if we have the death penalty, then people are less likely to commit atrocious crimes. Only if this were true. There is zero evidence to suggest that deterrence actually deters, there's zero evidence to suggest that the death penalty will actually deter crime. If you look at the violent crime statistics over time, you'll see this graph that starts to go up, right? And then the death penalty is essentially halted for a few years. And no, it didn't go down. It kept going up, but it kept going up at the same rate. It comes back. It keeps going up at the same rate. And then it spikes while the death penalty is still being used, which is very in contrary to the idea of deterrence. They've tried to do studies, they've tried to look into it, but no matter how much they look into it, there's no evidence to suggest that it actually deters anything. So the last reason, which yes, it's labeled as number 1, but it's the last one. Retribution. Now, as I've stated multiple times, retribution is part of justice. Ultimately, if we didn't have retribution, there would be many problems. We'd have people running around doing whatever they wanted, and it would be like we were having pre-flood times. The problem with retribution, though, is when you are doing it for the sake of wanting to see somebody hurt. When you are doing it for the sake of wanting retribution without restoration. When you go into this idea of retribution for the sake of punishment and wanting punishment out of the hatred for the person and what they've done, is no longer justice. It is an injustice. So, with all these reasonings and with all the biblical evidence I've found, I've concluded that while yes, the Bible does seem to support the death penalty, it also calls for an authentic justice. And with the way our modern court system is set up and the way our modern court system works, I do not see that authentic justice being used in the death penalty, and therefore I cannot be behind it in practice. So, thank you.
So I want to open it up to all of our guests first. If you have any questions or feedback for
Sanctuary until people could come together and decide whether or not you were guilty or innocent. So is that correct?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Well, sure.
For the sake of argument, yeah.
Okay. So for the sake of argument,
Yeah, like just say what you're gonna say.
So I think while I think you're right of saying I see now what you mean by the separation of the two can be messy, but in this situation, I guess I'd say you were right about how the threshold there. I don't really know where to find it per se. It would be tricky, but I'm saying in situations like that where we don't know for sure, there would be things that people would look over to make sure okay, is this person truly deserving of it? Right. Because either way, they are guilty of shedding someone's blood, but whether or not that they deserve the death penalty for it is the question.
So then that goes. So then my next question is this: I'm kind of asking a question that you've already answered, meaning you've already told us what your opinion is, but maybe flesh this out a little bit for me. That for Solomon, ostensibly the wisest person that ever lived, right? Or you know, it's aside from Jesus, I think. But you know, God-given wisdom beyond most people's capacity, right? For him to look at someone and say, "You are worthy of death," it seems like he's a lot more credible of being able to say that, right? And then even he had people gathered together to help him make that decision, which was probably part of the wisdom, right? You've kind of already answered the question that is it that you don't think the American justice system is capable of that level of wisdom? If so, like, is it possible for human courts outside of God's divine, as he did with Solomon, granting of wisdom, is it possible for a human court to be able to discern? I'm basically in that Solomon, you're good with Solomon saying this man needs to die, and he's executed, right? Is it possible for a modern day court to achieve that level of wisdom?
I don't think so. I think if you got someone who committed an atrocity of crime that's deserving of the death penalty, and you've got a jury, a judge, and everyone else involved, I think that there would be people in there who would hate the person for what they had done and want to see justice or not want to see justice, want to see retribution for retribution's sake. And when that happens, it becomes an unjust court, and therefore should not be putting people to death for it.
So, and that goes back to my threshold question. So, the thing that makes a person worthy of execution, or what I'm hearing in the argument is not so much whether or not they're guilty of it, it's whether or not anybody's hating them for it.
I wouldn't say that. I'd say either way, they're still guilty of the crime they committed. I just don't think that we as people should be passing on judgment that is unjust because of our heart posture.
So would you say they don't deserve capital punishment because someone hates them for it?
Say that again?
So like what you're saying, what I heard, correct me if I'm wrong, what I just heard was when someone's in that court that wants the death penalty because out of a heart of hatred for that person, that's when the court, that's when it's a no-go. That's when it's that person does not get capital punishment. So what changes? Because of that person's hatred, what changes to the guilty or the deserving of capital punishment?
I wouldn't say really anything for them changes. I would say it's rather on the court side. I'd say because of the court wanting to enact based off of a hatred or because of a personal desire, they are going from the threshold of justice into the threshold of vengeance, which we as Christians know is not something that is ours to take. And the vengeance which I'm talking of is sinful and therefore should not be done.
Got it. I'm gonna keep thinking about it.
Okay.
I like it. I like the depth. I like where we're at on this one. Sorry to monopolize the conversation. Yes, sir.
When I think of the death penalty, I think of someone with like a bag over their head getting shot, or truly, like, getting injected, like actually how this happens. So I get what you're saying in regards to the death penalty specifically, especially thinking about it in the context of the American justice system. But my question for you is, do you think this changes at all if it is someone killing someone purposefully in the middle of, or when they're caught in the act? So for example, if I'm a police officer or even just a civilian and I see someone committing one of these heinous crimes that we're saying, and they were to kill them in that moment, potentially, arguably to protect the victim or whatever it might be, they still got murdered in the process. Do you think that changes any of this?
So you're saying, like, can you rephrase it?
Yeah. So if I am holding someone at gunpoint and I get shot by a police officer, could be argued I just received a death penalty. Not the death penalty the way we think of it, but a death penalty. Do you think that's different than this?
I think in some senses yes, because you are actively pursuing and actively committing a crime, and there's another person at the other end of the barrel. So what the police officer is doing is, in the heat of the moment, there's an action that needs to happen. Versus for the death penalty, we have this person, and we already have this person imprisoned. We have them subdued through other means. So we essentially have them subdued. They can't do anything, and so now it's up to us to decide their fate. Versus in that situation, we don't have them subdued, and if we don't do anything about it now, they're going to continue to shoot whoever's at the end of their gun.
Okay.
So I do think it's a little bit of a different scenario.
Got it. Great, thanks.
Troy?
So I really like how you kind of divide justice into being both retribution and restoration. So I assume for someone who, quote unquote, deserves the, death penalty, but if we say, okay, this isn't justice, this is vengeance going to the death penalty, I assume the next best thing is life without parole that you said. Where's the restoration in that? Like, what makes life without parole better in the sense of, okay, this gives you, like, where do we find that restoration?
So the restoration is in the fact that we're now looking at someone who has committed an egregious crime and is deserving to be put to death, and yet we are saying to them, we're going to give you a chance to find Christ.
On their own?
Not on their own. There are
There's prison chaplains.
there are prison chaplains, and I sure hope if we are making this argument as Christians, then we would be making an effort to evangelize the incarcerated.
So the restoration doesn't come from someone's like view on that, like my view on the perpetrator of the loved one of mine. It's not about my forgiveness, it's about their chance.
It can, but it also, like I said, so mishpat is oftentimes referred to as like helping those who are kind of put down by society. So oftentimes this happens to the incarcerated community. People who are in prison, it's hard for them to find jobs, it's hard for them to get any kind of like status once they've been through prison or even charged for something. And so for that question, I think that the restorative aspect is the fact that we are helping or trying to help them while still giving them the punishment that they do need to get. So I think, yes, there are other ways in which we can help the victims. I just think that that's for the sake of what you're saying. The restoration for them is the fact that we're giving them a chance. Now the restoration for the victims, the restoration for the victims' families, maybe we go out our way and try to help them in any way we can. Mr. Moore?
No,
Oh, okay. Okay, Maddox?
Going back to Mr. Walker saying the cold police officer scenario, I guess is that kind of like with the justice and the restoration aspect? If we put someone to death in court, their victim, say they're victim of murder, their victim's already dead. But in that situation, that victim is still alive if that officer doesn't act. If that officer does act and kill the perpetrator, that victim gets to keep their life.
Yes.
It's like, so it becomes justice in that moment because you're saving another person's life in that sense.
Arguably, yes. Joshua?
I actually have two questions, but first one was, did you consider the trials of Christ when you were going through this?
Yes, at one point I did. Someone asked me about how, they asked me like, okay, so in a court, let's say everybody, if, I think it may have been Lila actually who asked me this, they said, if a court were to find somebody guilty, yet they were like, they had hatred towards the person who they put to death, who's the one guilty for putting that person to death, right? So I look at Christ and I say, all right, who is guilty for putting Christ to death? Some would argue Pontius Pilate. Some would argue the people who called for Barabbas. Because ultimately, it's our sins that were the ones who put him to death. So I did think about that a little bit, but past that, I didn't really think much else on it. Again,
My other question was, what about in instances of like warfare for like punishments for war crimes?
I'd say the same line of thinking still applies. If someone still commits, if someone commits a crime at war, like you said, if someone commits a war crime, I think they're still able to be put on trial for what they've done. I don't see how that changes too much, unless I'm misreading the question.
I mean, like Class A war criminals, because as far as I'm aware, the like international law on that subject right now is basically Class A war criminals. People like Hitler, of course, he killed himself first, but like they need to be put to death.
I mean, it goes back to my question of, are we going to justly put them to death, or are we going to do it out of hatred for them? And are we going to do it because we want to see what's worse for them and not what's best, or because we're doing it out of injustice and not rather justice, like this? I'm going to save you for a minute. Lila?
So is your argument that there's no room for the death penalty in our society,
you say that second part again?
Or that we don't approach it justly.
We don't approach it justly.
So not that there's no room for it, we're just not doing it right.
Yes, we're doing it horrendously. Ava?
So, I've heard people make the argument that whenever some people are sentenced to like life in solitary, that the effect that has on a person is worse than what the death penalty would provide. So, what would you say to someone who says that, like, the death penalty is a mercy compared to the life that they would have in solitary, where there's not room for redemption because they're alone and that, like, the mental effects that has?
I'm not saying I'm in support of life in solitary. I'm saying life in prison. They're still amongst other prisoners, still getting human interaction. I don't think I agree with you. I think life in solitary is not what humans are meant to go through. So in that instance, I'd have to think about it for a little bit. So as of right now, I don't have an answer. I'll see if I can think of something before, but I'll give some thought to it. Sarah?
How would you like quote unquote fix the justice system?
So that is a big question. That is a big question.
You got 5 seconds.
Alright, as an 18-year-old in Greenville, South Carolina, how do I fix the justice system? If I'm being completely honest, that is a huge. I do not think I'll give a good answer on that because I do not have all the knowledge it takes to apply that correctly. I'm 18 and there are politicians out here who still can't do it correctly, so I doubt I could come up with anything better. But from a unrealistic, just moral standpoint, I would say that we need to care for the incarcerated community because that is something, I'd say it starts there. There are obviously tons of things that need to be fixed, but I think it starts with realizing that these people have rights as human beings and that they need to be treated as such. Ultimately, I don't know like the logistics of everything involved, so I can't speak on that. But
It's an easy question.
yeah. Grayson.
So you brought up a statistic about like 2.5% saying they were satisfied, and like another 21% said that like they weren't. What's the rest of that statistic?
The remaining statistics are essentially people who just said like either declared not answering or said, I don't know how to feel. Like I am still working out how I feel about it, which is arguably also just a horrible spot to be in.
So if I could just toss out there to like Sarah's question and Grayson's kind of fuses where it's like, this is like I've heard a lot of presentations that revolve around the justice system, right? And that's really like what Sarah's asking. Like all of these topics are kind of getting at there are problems. There are obvious problems with our justice system, but also it's a very necessary system, and it could be a very good system. We need it. It could be something that helps us. We would like it to be. So what do we do to fix it? And it is chipping away at these little issues. Like somebody's doing recidivism later this week or next. Somebody's doing it. Anyways, so like there's all these little issues, right? But I really like that you brought in the theme of one of the, culturally speaking, so our class is culture, right? On the cultural level, 30,000 foot view, one of the issues that I find in a lot of these projects is the American system seems definitively bent on retribution as opposed to restoration. It should, whatever you think, like maybe you think that's a good thing, maybe not. Whatever it is, like our system is bent towards let's punish these people and make sure that the punishment meets the crime. Make sure that the punishment fits the crime. There's something really deeply human about that. We want people to get their just desserts. But then on the other side of, okay, this person has not been punished, this person is in jail, what now? What's the goal? This goes back to the life in prison question, where it's like, yeah, life in prison seems to do a lot of times, it seems like it could be more inhumane than capital punishment, right? So is the job of, then we've got the question, is the job of penitentiaries and jails and the prison system, is the job of that prison system to punish their inmates or to restore their inmates? And that's one of those conversations that just, it underlies everything, all of these different topics. It's something that Christians need to think well about when we're voting for politicians, when we're looking at, police brutality or whatever the issues are we're looking at. We need to ask ourselves a question, in the heart of God, is there more retribution or is there more of a desire for restoration? And that oftentimes is not a very popular conversation to have, right? Especially when those criminals just quote unquote deserve it, right? Somebody had their hand up and I forget. Anybody else?
You're talking about how there was like a steady stream of the death penalty, and you said it like spiked at one point. Can you speak on that and like why it spiked?
So yeah, so I don't have the graph with me right now, but if I did add a few slides after questions in case people ask stuff about. I had like 3 or 4 slides that if I took, I would be here for 30 minutes. So I know we do not want that. So, in 1907 to 1917, there was this 6 states decided that they were going to ban the death penalty. By 1920, 5 of those states had reinstated it. So, kind of all for nothing. In 1917, Russian Revolution happened. There was concerns of rising socialism, and World War I had begun in 1914. And so, right after that, 1920 happens. The 5 states reinstate the death penalty, and people start calling the death penalty a necessary social measure. So, over the next 20 years, there is a spike in the death penalty. The 30s alone had 1,670 executions. To give you some perspective, since we reinstate, there was another time where it got banned right here and then reinstated in 76. Since 76, we have had 1,600 executions. So in the 30s, 1 decade did 1,600. And in the 40s, you know, we're still in World War II, but we're past the Great Depression now. And so it starts going down to 1289. And then we have the 50s, which is called the golden age of American capitalism, and it goes down to 715 in the 50s. And in the 60s up until 76, we have, dare I say, hippies. So this movement going around of peace, love, and respecting people. And from the 60s until 1976, we have 191. So you ask, why is there that spike? I think because human depravity in those times of war calls people to make unrash decisions. And so I think that spike happened because of all the stuff going around in the world.
I think you did a great job, like wrapping up this topic about like what are the key issues around the death penalty, and you know how can we look at them and solve them. One of your points, deterrence. You had talked about how it can deter crime, but that it didn't have any effect on crime in society, like when the death penalty was instated and when it was not instated. But do you have anything about like in-prison crime that was within the walls of the prison? Because I would say that somebody that's on life without parole is more inclined to have to do criminal behaviors or to have criminal behavior within the prison system because they don't have really any chance of getting out.
Gotta be honest, I never even thought of that. I'll look into it, but I haven't looked into it at all. But I will. That's a really good question. I know. Is anyone else? Lila?
Do you know why those states that like stopped doing the death penalty for a certain period of time, do you know why they brought it back?
I do not. No. McCall, do you have a question?
Well, first I want to just really commend you for like the depth that you've thought through this. Like I just feel like you've had so many conversations with so many people to really unearth like what we should do as Christians in a nation that has the death penalty and all that. So I really loved your example with Joseph and Mary. I thought that was really, really neat to bring out that he was a just man for showing her mercy. I think that's like a really, really cool point in the middle of this whole conversation. My question though is, I think we've kind of touched on this in these conversations we've had, but maybe before the class would be helpful to think through again. So if I'm getting right the heart of your argument, that it's not necessarily the death penalty that's the wrong thing, it's the heart motivation behind it. It's because I have malice in my heart towards the brother, and I kill him for it, that's what is actually causing sin. We shouldn't be trying to carry out justice in that way, and it's not actually true justice. Would you say that's like a fair argument?
The only thing I tweak about what you said is you said that like we shouldn't be trying to do it. I think we should like be pushing for it so long as we're doing it justly. I just don't see us in the next few years or current history doing that.
Yeah, so at the end of your presentation, I think you said, like, my conclusion, like, I personally can't get behind doing the death penalty because it can't be justly administered in our system. So would that apply kind of like in the reverse towards good deeds, where because I can't cheerfully always serve the poor, I should just not try? Should I just avoid doing the good thing because I can't with a pure heart do it the right way, the most merciful way every single time? And it's better to just avoid that path altogether, because if I do it wrong, if I serve the poor with a non-cheerful heart, I'm actually doing probably more damage to that person, because I'm filling myself with pride, I'm filling them with, I don't know, some kind of negativity in that way, but it's not coming from a cheerful, loving heart, it's coming from a heart that's full of pride or whatever. So, yeah, that's my question, is like, can it be in the reverse thought?
I mean, you can think about it in the reverse, but I kind of don't see it that way, because I think, first of all, in the case of the death penalty, if I were to wrongly put someone to death, I have finalized their life, I have cut short their life, and the blood is now on my hands. I did it out of reasons that were not just, so I've unjustly put someone to death. Now, if I try to properly love my neighbor, and yet I fail, there is still there's still a way that justice can be served, and I can restore that relationship. There's still that restorative aspect of justice that can happen. Like, yes, I messed up, but I can have times to make up for it. I can have times to make amends. The problem with the death penalty is that once you do it, it's final. And it goes back to the thing about closure. The reason these people didn't find closure is because it didn't bring back the victim. Nothing will. They don't feel like they're going to be restored. So for your argument, I feel like because none of these other instances are final, none of them are fixable, I feel like it's not the same, it's not equal. Zoe?
If you were on death row, what would your last meal be?
Ooh, that is hard. Salmon, rice, and steak, probably.
Oh, that's a lot to take.
Victoria.
Like, is this just like a huge issue here in the US, or is it also a huge issue like all around the world? And is there any country doing it better than we are?
I don't know about that last part, but it is a problem in other nations, in other places as well. America, I just hit on because we live here and because we're all Americans. So.